This is episode number 205 of the A Bar Above podcast, and today we're going to do a deep dive into whiskey, and more specifically, bourbon. So if you want to learn a little bit about whiskey, definitely stay tuned. Welcome back to the A Bar Above podcast, everyone. Today we have a special guest, somebody I'm really excited to talk to, Samara Davis from Black Bourbon Society. How you doing, Samara?
Hey, Chris. Thank you for having me.
Oh, I am so excited to talk to you about all things whiskey and bourbon. You have no idea. I'm super excited about this one. So thanks for coming on to the podcast.
Excellent. Yeah. Again, I'm excited to be here, and cheers.
Yeah, cheers. Oh, I didn't have any whiskey today. I totally should. But before we get started, I'd love to learn kind of how you got so interested in kind of whiskey and specifically around bourbon. What kind of fueled that interest for you?
It's a long story. About 5-6 years ago, I started drinking whiskey. I was a big wine drinker, actually. And I was married at the time and had 2 kids, and just on a long trip to New Orleans with 2 screaming kids and all their equipment and all of that stuff. When we got to our Airbnb and I realized there wasn't any food, we ended up at this late night fried chicken place that's also in the middle of a liquor store to get food. And I asked wine just wasn't cutting it that night. And so I asked the clerk, I said, what do you have? Like, I need the best, strongest thing you have. And he handed me a bottle of 4 Roses single barrel. And from there, that was it.
You know, that's a great place to start too.
Right, in New Orleans.
Right, I mean,
at a gas station in the middle of the quarter. Absolutely.
That's amazing. I can actually almost envision the place you probably stopped at. That is a great place to start your journey with whiskey. That is really, really fun.
So that's how I got started. But it gets a little bit deeper into that. Like, I fell in love with the spirit. I fell in love with making cocktails with the spirit. And after just doing more research and learning about how the product was made, about how it's America's native spirit, and all these brands that are on the market, and they don't taste the same. Each bottle is unique. I just kind of fell down this rabbit hole. And I fell in love with the spirit, got rid of the husband, kept the whiskey and the kids, and have been to the hills ever since.
That's awesome. That's really cool. Sounds like you made up in the best at the end there.
Oh, yeah. Oh, absolutely. After that trip, I made out like a champ.
Nice. Excellent. And then what made you start Black Bourbon Society as well? So
beyond falling in love with whiskey, I also planned events. My background is in event planning, fundraising events. I worked with, I actually started off in the museum field, but doing development and doing galas and all of that. So I used to always plan and produce events from a social perspective for a very long time. And I ran into this woman who worked for one of the brands in San Francisco. And she was new to the area and needed help, selecting venues and bar accounts to produce her events for the brand that she worked with. And through that experience, I got a taste of what it meant to do direct consumer marketing, what it meant to work for an agency. But I also got insight into marketing strategies for the brands. And that's where I found some alarming factors and some holes that needed to be filled, especially when catering to diverse communities or consumers of color. And I created Black Bourbon Society to show and prove that there was a niche audience of African-American drinkers that deserve to be acknowledged and targeted to in direct consumer engagement for the brands.
Absolutely. So is that the majority of the work that you do now is through Black Bourbon Society?
So Black Bourbon Society is twofold, right? We we have our own following, right? Because in order for us to prove that we were worthy to do these engagement events with, we had to create the audience. So we've got over 25,000 members across the country, some overseas as well. And we really do cultivate this community of excited African-American bourbon enthusiasts, and who are all really focused around premium whiskey, sustainability, diversity and inclusion, advocating for D&I in the industry. There are a very culturally sound and conscious consumer, right? Mm-hmm. High discretionary consumer. So we've cultivated this audience. We educate this audience to make sure that they are aware of what bourbon is, that they appreciate and love the spirit fully and truly. So that's half of BBS. But then the other half of BBS is working with the brands one-on-one to create strategies to market to this audience. So BBS is sort of like the bridge. We connect the brands to our consumers in a genuine way.
Very cool. And I'm just super excited. I actually looked on your Instagram feed, before reaching out to you, and immediately it just looks like you're having the best time. Every image on there is just you just having a great time. Everybody else around you's having a great time. So I'm very thankful for you to be here and sharing your passion with whiskey. So thank you very much.
Absolutely. I kind of describe that in a very corporate level way, right? But the truth is we have a following of bourbon drinkers. We work with the brands to create amazing events. And in order to do that, in order to put on these fabulous direct consumer marketing events, they look so fun, right? We're making cocktails, we're dancing, we're having food pairings, we're doing brunches with mimosas, right? With beam inspired mimosas. So yes, it's fun and engaging work. But it really does have a mission. Like I tell our members all the time, we are so much bigger than bourbon. Yes, we love bourbon, but the goal behind our organization is always to be inclusive, to be included, to be recognized, acknowledged, and to work with the brand. So the brands see a different side of their audience.
Right.
Some of the brands, for instance, they get so stuck on textbook marketing tactics, right? They get stuck in stereotypes that are printed in hundreds of marketing books on different demographics.
Sure.
But what they're realizing is by engaging with us, they're getting to know our audience firsthand. And they're getting to see that our audience is not what is necessarily described of the Black consumer in any textbook. So it's redefining what our audience looks like for them. And again, creating these amazing experiences for us to just have fun and enjoy.
Right. And I imagine that it kind of has this much deeper, much more genuine connection to the end consumer as well, because they are asking you to help them understand the consumer base, which I think is just a win-win for everybody in the end.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
We feel like we win. We had a great summer. We've had good winters and falls and everything in between,
That's awesome. Very cool. So I also want to ask you another quick question, because I listened to your podcast and the last one. And first of all, I think it was about a year ago, if I'm not mistaken. So late congratulations on your wedding.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Love the podcast. And along the podcast, your husband brought up the fact that you guys own 8 businesses. Is that something you can enlighten us a little bit more about what some of those businesses are?
I can only speak on the ones that I have a major hand in.
Sure.
My husband is, he's got his hand in a lot of different pots. So I'm aware of them, but I might not necessarily be in the everyday operations of them. So the ones that I'm connected with, Black Bourbon Society, of course. We've got Diversity Distilled, which is our nonprofit organization that advocates for diversity and inclusion from a corporate perspective. So we're looking at D&I in the industry itself, not just not with audiences, right? Mm-hmm. So we've got BBS, we've got Diversity Distilled, We've got BZP, which is Bow and Production. So that does all of our film projects. Like we've done a couple of film projects with the Spirits Network, and we've got a couple of other things in the pipeline that we're producing as far as like video film content. So that will fall underneath that. I think that's all I have my hand in. I have my own personal brand. Sorry. Sure. So my personal brand is I am doing personal development and coaching. And really, I see this as my legacy project. This is my gift to women who need to step into their purpose, or who are seeking to step into their purpose, and helping them along their way. And it's all about professional development, getting aligned in your path, following your purpose, being your best self. And so that's a whole nother podcast, right? About my journey. We kind of glossed over my journey to get to here, but there's a deeper spiritual, therapeutic, psychological aspect to that too, that my personal brand would dive into.
Yeah, and it's super important to have that, especially as an entrepreneur and somebody that's super busy all the time, is having that kind of story and things to share is super important, just to kind of know where you are and where you've been and where you're headed. I feel like that is a super important part of like owning a business. Absolutely.
And I think a lot of people, they know where they are and they know where they want to be.
Right.
But filling in the space between then and now is scary as all get out. And that's what we help them. We help them to create that path so that it's easier to get to where they want to be.
Absolutely. It's funny because I did a series probably 2 years ago about bartender to entrepreneur. And I interviewed probably a handful of people, probably 5 or 6 people. And the number one thing that I keep hearing about that journey, and I will validate this from my perspective as well, is how much fear comes with that journey, right?
Absolutely.
How much self-doubt, how much just like, you're not going to imposter syndrome, the whole 9 yards, and you just got to keep showing up and doing the work. And I think we could have a very meaningful conversation about that.
Part two.
I think so. I think that's going to be a whole other series where it's just going to be you and I talking about that with a big glass of really good whiskey.
Absolutely. So I think that's a 4. The other ones, my husband owns a construction business. He owns a private equity fund. That's his newest project. He's got a real estate development firm. But along these same lines, my husband and I, when we first met and were friends, we decided that if we were to get into a relationship, we would approach everything as our business.
Yeah.
So we do 51-49. That's so I name the ones that I'm 51% owner of. He's 49%. And then I'm 49% of all these other private equity funds and real estate companies and construction businesses that I don't necessarily do, but he's the 51%. So we do talk about it all together. We, sometimes our businesses require us to be hands on deck together in it. And other times we can, kind of divide and conquer. But we are co-owners of everything that we do. It's just not his and it's just not mine.
That's super cool. So you guys are like the ultimate power couple is what I'm hearing.
I guess, yeah.
No, seriously though, I'm not joking. That's awesome.
Like, I think you should always be a power couple with your partner.
Absolutely, 100%. Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. But yeah, it's amazing to see kind of that connection that you guys have. Is like it sounds like you were both entrepreneurs independently. And then the combination of the two of you is just kind of next level, if I had to say it, put it into words.
Absolutely.
Very cool. So that being said, I would love to pick your brain. Actually, one last thing. How long until you guys have your own distillery or your own spirits company?
Do you know how much it costs to run a distillery?
It's ridiculous. I know that. Okay, I just want to throw it out there to see if that was on the table or not.
No, it's not on the table. Maybe a private label.
That's what I'm thinking. Yeah.
Maybe a private label, but no time soon.
Yeah.
And definitely not a distillery. I mean, you're talking millions.
Oh, yeah. No, the build out alone is just going to be ridiculous. So big fan of the whole private labeling thing. I think that could be a good path forward.
Yeah.
When you have some free time, of course.
That'll be the retirement plan.
Right? So perfect then. So let's talk about kind of whiskey as kind of the bigger category that is, bourbon sits in. I always kind of like to take the macro look first, and then we'll kind of go a little bit more microscopic in a bourbon. And I'm sure we can go granular if time permits, but let's start at kind of the 30,000 foot level of whiskey. So I always like to kind of wrap my head around what is a starting material that we're basically fermenting and turning into alcohol. So with whiskey, what are we starting with as far as like a source material for the spirit?
Grains.
Mm-hmm.
It's grains is the base, and the grains can be a number of things. It could be corn, it could be barley, rice, wheat. Those are some of the most popular ones. But yeah, it's just starting off with a grain. Mostly, sometimes, you've got single malts, right? So sometimes it's just one singular grain, or it's a blend of grains to distill and turn into whiskey.
Perfect. And then when you have like more dominant grains, let's say you have a 80% corn grain, like what does each individual grain kind of impart on the end result of flavor? So we can kind of go on, I guess, the major ones, right? So let's start with corn. Like what does corn bring to a whiskey that the other grains don't?
So, the best way to describe this to anyone is to think about your favorite foods, right? So cornbread, for instance, it's bready. It's a little on the sweet side. It's got this light flavor to it. Sometimes it can come off like almost like a popcorn, or almost like a nutty flavor if it's roasted. So corns do provide like this light sweet note, but then also there's some great oil and kind of like some heavy, robust characters that come out of corn, right? Versus something like a rye, if you think of like a rye bread, it's a little bit spicy, it's peppery, and it's got this great kickback that's in there. So you might get a little bit of sweet on the front end, but you totally get like this spice pepper that lingers in your mouth as well. And same, barley is to me, out of all the three major grains, right? Barley is probably the most mild of it, but it's got this, especially the way that they malt the barley, they let it sprout a little bit before they ferment it or cook it and ferment. It's got this malty flavor, almost like this creamy mouthfeel, like this full-on mouth feel and texture. I don't know if I'm making sense, but it's a whole experience with malt. But it also is very light and kind of balancing and neutralizing, especially if you've got a rye and a corn together. It'll kind of balance and neutralize some of those oily and spice notes that come in together with those two grains,
Yeah, and it sounds like kind of there's on two separate sides of the spectrum. You have corn, you have rye, and it sounds like the malted barley kind of bridges the kind of gap between those two.
It does.
So polarized,
great binder, right? Yeah.
Right. Cool. Okay, perfect. Yeah, because I was having a hard time figuring out like the place of each one in kind of a bigger mash bill setup, but that makes total sense to me now. Like, okay, the barley just kind of provides the foundation, and then these cool other flavors are kind of like the accents and kind of like the fun stuff that you add into it.
But barley can stand on its own, right? So with Irish whiskey, with Scotch, those are mostly single malt. Those are malted barley, single grain whiskeys, and it's all barley. So it does, again, it's got this light, delicate flavor on its own, got this great mouthfeel texture, kind of like it kind of just coats your mouth almost like a cream almost. I'm sorry, when I taste whiskey, I also envision it. So I'm totally in my head envisioning how this experience is. But but also, so it does have some characters on its own. Of course, with Scotch, you can, it ages differently. It does pick up some wood flavors differently. They also throw in that whole peat notes, right? So that kind of brings out some extra funky notes that really balance off that barley in certain ways as well. And gives you some really crazy flavor experiences too. So barley is still, it's a good grain on its own, but it's a great binder when it's combined in a blend, when it's in a mash bill.
Very cool. And you kind of touched on a subject, but kind of we've taken a 30,000 foot level view of it, of kind of how it all starts. Now, the next step is to kind of talk about the different categories, because within whiskey, you have bourbon, you have rye, you have Canadian Irish, and all these smaller kind of geographic and mostly geographic kind of designations around them. So I'd love to kind of learn what are some of the dominant geographical kind of designations around whiskey, and if you could talk about, like, when you think about an Irish whiskey, you think about these flavors, if that makes sense.
Yes. So, whiskey, again, is the category itself. It's the umbrella, right? It's basically all spirits that are distilled from grains and aged or barreled in some sort of way. We have to throw that in there. So that's the whiskey category. Now, of course, you've got the tried and true age-old, tale as old as time debate over which came first, Scotch or Irish whiskey. So we just let them have it. Who cares, right? It's whiskey. It's just whatever. It's not who did it first in this instance. But, you have to think, when you think about the flavors of whiskey, it's good to think about the climates that are also involved in the materials that are involved. So again, coming from Ireland or from Scotland, the major grain coming from that area is barley. I don't think corn was ever in those countries. They didn't realize corn, they didn't get to corn until the settlers moved over to the United States or to the territories at that time, or whatever you called us back then. And they ran across the Native Americans who were growing maize. That was the introduction to corn into whiskey. But if we're talking about, what is a grain that they would see in Ireland and Scotch, it was, of course, barley. So that they use that, and they use that technique. So Ireland, you're going to get these really light flavors, not only from that barley being so, just creamy mouthfeel, just a great light flavor, but then also using the types of woods that they use to barrel the whiskey in and also age that. It's not a lot of sun, not a lot of heat, very cool, mild temperatures there. So the interaction of that whiskey in the woods is it's a delicate touch, honestly. Same thing over in Scotland as well. It's, this is how you can get to have a 23-year-old whiskey or a 14-year-old whiskey, and it's still extremely light in color. It's still very light in texture and flavor, because it's just got this slow interaction with the whiskey in the wood over that time period. I think it's also important to note that Ireland especially, it masters blending. The blending over in Ireland is amazing. And the techniques around blending are great, which is something that doesn't necessarily, pop up in the States that much when it comes to bourbon and American whiskey. So the techniques of, I would say slow cooking or slow roasting whiskey in Ireland and Scotch, and just having this nice, delicate balance. It's just dance of light honey and light hay, just all those great notes. And then the blending techniques is great that comes out of those areas. But when, of course, you get over to America, like I said, the folks who migrated from Europe into America, they brought with them those whiskey techniques. And that's our introduction into corn, because they didn't have barley in the States. They saw all this grain, all this corn, and they were like, oh, I know what to do with that. In the winter months, when it started, before it went bad, they're like, oh, we've got extra corn. I know exactly what to do with that. And they started distilling it and turning it into corn whiskey. Then you throw it into a barrel, a charred barrel, right? Because those barrels were used back in those days. And then you didn't want to put your whiskey in a barrel that had sardines in it. So you would burn the inside of the barrel to get some of that smell out and all that stuff, kind of sanitizing it, right? And then
Right.
you throw your whiskey in it and let it age. And when you come out, it's, when it comes out, it's this color and it's bourbon.
Yeah.
That's the birth of it.
Right. And it's interesting that it's so native to the United States because of kind of that pathway that you mentioned before of like, that is just the native grain. That's what we had to work with. And, being resourceful and wanting a drink, they're just like, let's do it.
Let's try it. Why not?
Right, exactly. And then as kind of we back up, because you mentioned Irish, you mentioned kind of United States with bourbon. You also kind of touched on Scotch. Scotch in general, when people say Scotch, they tend to think of like more dominant flavors, bigger, kind of real focus on the malted barley side of things. Would that be a fairly accurate assessment of kind of like what Scotch represents to most people?
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. Again, those grains grow all over the place. And then of course you have your peat there, right? You've got honey peat, which they then smoke and add some extra flavors to it as well. And then, you've got some interesting techniques like Japanese whiskey that follows right in line with Scottish techniques of taking whiskey.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know much about Canadian whiskey. We kind of act like it doesn't exist. So, but they're high rise, right? Because in the northern areas of our country and into Canada, there's tons of rye up there. There's not a lot of
Right.
So they've got some great rye whiskeys and up there as well. So I don't know. I don't know what they do in Canada.
What's funny is I've kind of felt similar ways about Canadian whiskey. It's like you have Irish, which is this beautiful expression. It's like you mentioned, kind of honeyed and heathered and kind of subtle and blended beautifully. And then you have kind of more dominant styles, of whiskey in general. And then you have Canadian. And it's like, yeah, it's all right. Get what you're doing. It's not like this over amplified flavor. It's like really subtle and really just chill. And I guess that would kind of make sense, yeah, it's funny how traditionally Canadian whiskey has been so mellow, and then you get those high rye expressions that you were mentioning, that are just like flavor bombs, and they just kind of like upend everything we think about with Canadian whiskey. So it's kind of an unfair question to kind of like try to categorize stuff, but I think traditionally that's how a lot of consumers probably see these big categories of whiskey as far as what to expect. Sure.
I think also, Canada, because they're our neighbors, we often judge them a lot because America had such strenuous rules and regulations around bourbon and whiskey. Whereas Canada doesn't have any rules. So Canada, you can throw in coloring, you can throw in flavoring, you can make it appear to be darker and aged and all of that. Whereas America, like we actually have to earn our stripes, So that's why we give them a hard time because
we still love it. We still love it.
Yeah, it's decent. But like you said, it's like, it's decent, but there is something to be said about the craftsmanship that goes into American whiskey.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more. It is definitely one of my favorite spirits, hands down. And I think a lot of people will agree with both of us on that. But I do have to ask, what is your favorite style of whiskey now?
So I told you, I was like, my answer might shock you.
I'm ready for it.
So I'm a big bourbon drinker, founder and creator of the Black Bourbon Society, but I absolutely love a good Scotch. Ooh. I love Scotch. And it's all my husband's fault because I was a big, bourbon drinker when we met. He was a Scotch guy. And he introduced me to a lot of different Scotches. At first, of course, like everyone that kind of enters into the Scotch territory or into the Scotch field, they're thinking, it tastes like Band-Aids, it's rubber bands, it's gross, it's too smoky, it's like, ugh. But I actually really love that about Scotch. Mm-hmm. I love that you can get flavor notes that completely take you off of the flavor wheel, right? Of course, I've never tasted a Band-Aid, right? But I can really smell, I can pick it up on a nose. I can pick it up on, I may
Mhm.
get smoked salmon on an expression. I may get a little sulfur or a little iodine. I might get burnt rubber tires if I'm drinking like an Optimor or something like that. So for me, I think Scotch pushes the limits with the flavor, especially when you start adding in that smoky peat, I forgot the word. Phenols.
Oh, phenol, sure.
When you start adding in those high level phenols from that smoky peat,
Yep.
it just takes it all over the place. I also think Scotch has mastered finished casks. So the addition of, they use ex-bourbon barrels, they'll use rum barrels, Pedro Jimenez sherry casks. They just kind of get cognac barrels. So you start to impart flavor from used barrels as well. And again, it just kind of creates a mind explosion for me. So I love it.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy. Like, and no two houses are even close to each other as far as like flavor maps or flavor profiles, if you will. But yeah, it is. I wish I had more money because it's a very great whiskey to kind of go into, but it's also very expensive because it takes time. It is a level of craftsmanship that takes a long time to mature. So yeah, I look forward to investigating it more in the future.
Oh, absolutely. But, so I have my collection here is, of course, tons of bourbon. We do have Scotch and quite a bit of tequila and gin. So our collection we're turning into a liquor store over here.
Nice.
But there are some Scotches that I can only buy when we go out to dinner. Like I'll never order bourbon when we're out to dinner or like after dinner drink because we have it here at the house, right? But those Scotches that I can't find or can't justify spending $2.99, $3.29 on those super high bottles, I'll just go ahead and treat myself to a nice pour because it's worth it. It's the only time I'm going to get it.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's so much, like you're saying, it's so much easier to have a little bit than to invest in an entire bottle. Your money just goes a lot further and you can try so much different stuff for the same price. So I love that idea. I think it's really cool. And I have to ask, do you have a single malt that you absolutely adore? Desert Island single malt.
I have a house, like House of Balvenie, right?
Yeah.
House, like anything Balvenie makes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Perfect.
Desert Island scenario, put a bottle of anything Balvenie and I'm happy. Everything, not anything.
All of
everything,
it.
Everything Balvenie and I'm happy.
Perfect. Excellent. I knew going into this, I think I put this in the email when we were talking, this is going to be a very expensive podcast for me to record because my shopping list is just going to get ridiculous after this conversation. So clearly I need to do some more research in Balvenie. So thank you.
Yes. Oh gosh.
My wife might be following up this email. So just letting you know.
Okay. Yeah. Let's say, where should I start? Like, okay, there's a 14-year, there's a 17, there's a 21, like.
Well, and then they also have those kind of director's cuts or master distiller editions too, right? With the Balvenies, and they do a lot of experimenting in wood from my memory as well, right? So
tons of wood, like the 14 years in the Caribbean cast, the 17 is a double wood, and the 17 is just, I finally broke down and bought the bottle.
Oh, nice!
It was just that great.
Nice.
The 21 is in a port wood. I have not done that. Maybe I'll ask for my birthday. I'm going to ask for that for my birthday.
There you go.
but yes, they've done American Oak Cast. They've got all these series that are going on. Anytime I go to, you know what else, Chris? Anytime you get a whiskey festival, Whiskeys of the World, or that, pay for the VIP because they always have Balvenie. They've got like the ton 1509. They've got all the rare expressions, and it's worth it just to taste those.
That's a great tip. And if you ever go out to Whiskeys of the World, that's in San Francisco, right?
They have them all over. So there's one in San Francisco. There's one here in Atlanta this year. I know that they reduced their stops because of COVID, but they are doing them in person this year. So just Google you'll figure it out.
Perfect. Cool. So one other thing I want to kind of chat with you about, because now we're going to start to shift our focus a little bit more towards bourbon. On your blog, you've been doing a really cool series over the last, I think, 30 days, if I'm not mistaken, or starting to.
Yeah, we did that in September for National Bourbon Heritage Month. We always do a challenge called BBS Bourbon 30, where we encourage our members to try a different bourbon every day for 30 days. And it's not to get drunk. So I want to set the scene, right? Like, we're not encouraging alcoholism.
Of course, yeah.
But we're encouraging enthusiasts, right? We're encouraging you to build your palate and to start to see the nuances of it. So we only do about ½ ounce to 1 ounce per day. And then you have to write your tasting notes on it too. So you have to examine the color, you've got to nose, you've got to taste and pay attention to the characteristics of the whiskey for 30 days. So it's quite a task for our members to complete. But it is the best way I think you can grow an appreciation for bourbon, because as you go through that process, no bourbon is going to taste the same. You've got 30 different bourbons. They all have unique characteristics. They're all processed a different way. They've all aged, had different locations. They've all, they all have different mash bills. Each bottle is truly unique.
Yeah, and there's nothing like tasting those like in a compressed timeline and really kind of critically thinking about what you're tasting. So I was into wine for a long time. Sounds like similar to you. And the exercise of analyzing a wine is actually really, really intense. And, casually sipping a wine versus critically thinking and examining a wine are very, very different, in my opinion. And doing that to spirits and bourbon is actually a little bit harder. Just because it has more power behind it. So palate fatigue is kind of a real thing. So spreading it out over 30 days and critically analyzing all those things is a great way to kind of build a mental library of kind of like flavors that you can pick out from a spirit. That's super cool.
I love that you said that. It's a mental library. And that's literally how we taste. And literally how I suggest folks get used to tasting. Like, there's file cabinets in my head. There's one for fruit, spice, herbs, wood notes, like the random notes, right? The alcohol notes, just all these different types of filing cabinets. And as I'm sipping a whiskey, I'll sip and I'll say, okay, what fruit notes am I picking up? And literally, it's like pulling open that fruit jar, fruit cabinet, and saying, okay, is it stone fruit? Is it bright fruit? Is it green apple? Is it citrus? Is it whatever? And then diving deeper. Or, okay, let's focus on spice. Opening up that cabinet. Okay, is it cinnamon or is it nutmeg? Is that clove? Is that allspice? And just kind of like rummaging through a filing cabinet until I find the one that's in the glass. And it's like, okay, got it. Next. And it's like I love it. Mental library.
Yeah, absolutely.
That, by the way.
Yeah. Totally. And I think that once you say it and once you can envision what that flavor is and build that like tasting note on your mouth, it falls into place. You're like, oh my God, it's apricot. Oh, is it fresh apricot or dried apricot? It's definitely dried apricot. And then as you say it out loud and everybody that's tasting it's like, oh, totally. I totally get dried apricots now. And, once you can describe it and like think about it, it makes all the difference on how you actually taste a whiskey, in my opinion.
Absolutely. And there's there's some notes that you just can't pick up. And so that then begs of you to go out and explore and start eating and tasting new dishes and new spices. For the longest, I didn't know what cardamom tastes like.
Oh, yeah.
I kept saying, oh, this has cardamom in it. And I'm like, sure. Like, if I know, like, I don't know what cardamom tastes like.
Right.
So I had to buy a bottle of cardamom and literally just sit there and like pour some of the seasoning into a bowl and smell it and then taste it.
Yep.
And train my palate that way to be able to pick it up so that it would be a part of my mental Rolodex, right? Or my mental library. And so now I can say, oh, that's cardamom, registered. I got it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's one of the funnest parts for me is kind of really diving deep into flavors and like really have a intelligent like pinpoint on what that flavor means. So that's super cool. I'm really excited about that. And so you're about halfway through, about a third of the way through, if I'm not mistaken. What has been one of the favorites along this 30-day journey for you?
So this journey this month has been very interesting because I have partnered with Heaven Hill Distillery.
Oh, one of my favorites, by the way.
Yes. Now that's my favorite bourbon house, like Desert Island. Just if the zombie apocalypse hits tomorrow, drop me off at Heaven Hill and we're fine. Like that's my but literally Heaven Hill creates so many whiskeys, so many dynamic whiskeys. I've decided to try to taste 30 different expressions of bourbons that they own.
Oh, cool.
Right. So the distillery has had to help me out a little bit, but we've gotten everything from like this Elijah Craig grenade that's only found in the distillery itself to things like, bottom of the shelf dusties like J.W. Dant and Evan Williams Green Label or Heaven Hill Green Label 6-year, or JTS Brown, like, $12 bottles all the way up to Parker's Heritage, which is, goes on the secondary for 200.
Right.
So they're all over the place. All the Elijah Craigs, right? There's so many great bottles that come out of the Heaven Hill Distillery. So out of my favorite, I don't know. I have so many favorites. I love this baby right here, the Heaven Hill Bottled and Bond. I wish I could find it. Or I've got a couple bottles of this. But this will be my everyday sipper if I drank every day. But Old Fitzgerald is amazing. Old Fitzgerald Prime, the 86 proof, which is normally bottom of the shelf, is a fantastic bourbon. That's probably the star. That's probably the star for me.
Yeah, they do such a good job in that one. Yeah. I think it's one of the more underrated bourbons for sure.
Yeah, so many. I mean, we do Evan Williams Bottled and Bond blind in blind tastings all the time, and that is always a winner. So I'm having a good month.
September sounds like a really good month then.
Yeah.
So when you're, I kind of want to go back one step and ask you, like, when you're actually like evaluating a spirit, like whiskey, what do you do? Like, what's your process when you sit down for the first time and evaluate a new whiskey?
Well, okay, I'm going to show you.
Okay.
If we got time, I'll hurry it up. But, first thing I'm doing is I'm noticing the color of the whiskey. So I'm always holding it up to the light, making sure I, remark on the color, if it's copper, if it's gold, and if it's red. I'm looking at the legs, a trick from wine, right? You want to see if it's got legs, see what the sugar content may be from the tree sugars in there. And so I'm kind of already setting my expectation based off of appearance. The best thing for me, I think, especially if you're new to bourbon too, is get it out of the bottle because the labels can somewhat jade our opinion.
Sure.
Like we expect certain bottles or the price point of a certain bottle to taste amazing. And it may not necessarily true. So I get it out in the glass and I'm looking at it as is. And then the next thing I'm doing is I'm nosing it. And I may spend, 10, 15 minutes just letting it open up. Especially if it's a high proof bourbon, sometimes I'll pour it and I'll walk away. I'll go, play with my kids for a little bit or wash a dish or something. And then I'll come back to it wherever it is in the room just to let it open up. So, and sometimes, these bourbons, especially if they've been trapped in these bottles for a really long time or they're aged, they'll make the whole room smell amazing. They just blossom right up. So I'll let it get some air and I'm nosing it and smelling it, and then after I've kind of nosed it and I picked up some notes and I've noted what I've, like this is like total like roasted like roasted nuts. It's got some warm, rich caramel in there. It's got some heat, some baking spices. Like all of that is just like now starting to kind of roll up. After I've done that, then I'll start to sip it. And I'll chew it, Kentucky chew. So you want to sip, but you also want to make sure that you're getting it on all parts of your tongue and on the back of your palate. I like to chew it and get it in between my teeth too. And then, just drink it and really enjoy it. Notice how it makes me feel. And just notice any memories or any ideas that pop up into my head. The thing that I love the most about whiskey is that it really is a brain exercise. I wish, we could get some scientific backing on this, but it's really triggering your olfactory senses.
Mm-hmm.
So it's, not this one, Evan Williams Bottled in Bond, for instance. Every time I drink that, I can literally hear Take Me Out to the Ball Game playing in the back of my ears.
Oh, crazy.
Because it's that corn. It just reminds me of Cracker Jacks.
Sure.
It reminds me of going to the Dodger games with my father when I was a kid. So yeah, I'm just waiting to see what pops up. Sometimes I get quick tasting notes and I'm able to say, okay, that's citrus, that's vanilla, that's oak, that's honey, corn, whatever. And then other times I'll see things like, I'll get a vision of it. Oh, that's green. Mm-hmm. And then I start to think, okay, what things are green? Grass is green. It might be a hay. It might be apple. It might be that. And then I kind of go down that rabbit hole as well. But this is an experience. This is a sensory experience.
Yeah. Now, whenever I taste rye, and it's been this way since the first time I tried a rye, the first flavor I always get, you mentioned green, I always get English peas. Hands down, every single time. I can't explain it.
Wow.
I know, it's the weirdest thing, but the first time I tried it, I think it was R1, way back in the day when R1 launched. I tried it, I was like, wow, somebody put green peas in my glass. And after that, I every time I try rye, I just smell and taste English peas.
I'm glad I don't taste peas in my life. Because I would not drink it.
You know what? I'm a sucker for green peas. I'll admit it,
whatever you love, right? So if that's what that triggers and you're like, yes, English peas, I love it.
It's so funny though. Yeah, it's crazy. I know, but that's just how the brain works, right? You flash onto something you recognize and then that's it. Like, okay, cool. So it's funny, like anything that is rye dominant, it's the first thing I taste, and then I taste all the spices behind it. But it's always because that green vegetal note just screams pea to me. So that's super funny.
That's awesome. So yeah, so that's your brain at work. But those are great. Those are great. Like these are brain exercises. This is going to prevent us from having dementia.
You know what? One glass at a time. That's all I can say.
Cheers to that. Yeah.
Absolutely. So we're just going to go kind of rapid fire through this next section. I'd love to get your thoughts on best bourbons or whiskeys at certain price points. So starting at the bottom up to $20, like what is your favorite like two that you would put in that category?
I think I've already said it. Evan Williams Bottled in Bond is the best $14.99 you could ever spend.
Yep.
Second bottle, it's a little over 20. I would say probably, what else kind of rolls in that? Maybe, but Burial Barton, if you can still find it, I think it's under $20.
Nice. Okay. Very cool.
Got a great cherry note on it. Yeah.
Yeah, that one's going to be hard to find, though, I would imagine.
I think it's hard to find. I know you can find it in Kentucky, but Burial Barton, if you can get your hand on it, and it may be in a plastic container, like it's that cheap.
Nice. I love it.
But it's good.
All right, so the next category, like $20 to $40, like what is kind of the sweet, the sweet spot for whiskey in there?
That's such a wide variety. So like right in the low 20s, I think that's where like Bardstown, Bottled in Bond, that one is probably like 24, 25. That's another great one. I think you can maybe get some Maker's Mark on sale somewhere in there.
Yeah.
Elijah Craig is probably at that 30, like Elijah Craig small batch is probably in that $30 range. Henry McKenna is supposed to be in that range, but it's, it's gotten world's best whiskey like 3 years in a row.
Right.
So it's price gouged now.
Yeah.
But there's like that truly is a place like if you want to start your bourbon journey, start in the $30 to $40 range. Don't pay anything more, or you can go lower if you want, but that $30 range is probably the sweet spot.
I agree with you. I think like right in there, you're going to find some world-class whiskeys. Like,
absolutely. Tried and true.
Value for money too. Like you're just going to enjoy what comes out of that price point, in my opinion. And then kind of like money is actually ceiling is $100, $40 to $100. Anything in there that just kind of pops out at you.
It's such a wide range now.
It is. I know. But
it's such a wide range.
Once you get past that $40 mark, you kind of gotta. It's all kind of in that category of like, all right, maybe up to 70, but still, it's like, all right, it's a little bit outside what I would daily drink. So it truly is starting to approach more of a special occasion whiskey, in my opinion. But I'm also very cheap.
You're right on the money on that one. And there's also a lot of new brands that should be in a $30 to $40 range that because of overhead expenses, because of private labeling and the cost of glass, they're stuck in that 70, 75 range area. Well, but I say, your E.H. Taylors are supposed to be in that area.
Right.
Of course, again, because they're so coveted and they're so loved, they often go for higher than that. Even your Blantons is supposed to be 65, but can honestly go for 150 in some places. Don't buy it at 150, but people try and sell it for more than what it's worth. So yeah, I would say like somewhere like E.H. Taylor has to be, probably one of my favorites in that range. Shanks is also one of my favorite bourbons. It's made by Michter's. And it comes in right at 99, I believe, like 90 to 99. That is the best bourbon. That is like my favorite bourbon. And if you can get your hand on that, it would be worth every penny.
Yeah, and I'm so impressed by what Michter's has been doing. They have just a fantastic lineup. So yeah, I agree with you. Anything in their wheelhouse, I will 100% drink.
And agreed. Even their American whiskey, their US 1 bourbons are in that area. They're probably closer to that $50 range, I think. Yeah, get it. Yes.
Yeah, definitely. I know. I think I had a chance to try it was either 30 or 40. I can't remember what they launched a long time ago, but I had a chance to try that. And that was probably one of the best spirits I've ever had in my entire life. It was just like, talk about a journey. It was just like minutes long of just tasting, and it was pretty wild. So last one is Price to No Object. I think you mentioned it already. Anything from Balvenie, right?
Yeah, Price to No Object, anything from Balvenie. If it's whiskey's concerned, bourbon, I'm sorry, if it's bourbon, there are some bottles that I would just pay for no matter how much it costs. Shanks will probably be one of those. The birthday bourbons are fun. They can get a little hot. Old Forester birthday bourbons can get a little hot. Blue Run is a new label that I love. And their price point is high. So they're in the 120s, 150s. But no, bourbon shouldn't be expensive. It's corn.
Right.
And it's bountiful. So technically it shouldn't be ridiculously expensive.
You would think. I know there's been a couple of
there's
brands
reasons why, right? Like, there's what I call designer label.
Right.
Designer bourbon, like your Pappy's, right? And it's $2,000, $1,500, whatever. I would never pay that for that. I wouldn't.
I remember when Pappy was under $100, and I feel like an old man saying that, but I remember when you could find a bottle of 12-year, 15-year, no problem.
That wasn't that long ago. So you're not even an old man, right? That was literally like.
It was like 10 years ago. Yeah, exactly. It was crazy. And all of a sudden they just made their mark, and, it went nuts, and good for them for getting that price. But I never in Black Bourbon Society, you'll never hear me mention Pappy. You'll never hear me mention it. And I won't say like, oh, it's worth it. Because at the end of the day, what does $2,000 taste like? What is
like, what do you expect a bourbon to taste like that
Right.
costs $2,000?
It
So
tastes like my
no,
mortgage.
it tastes like tutors for
Right.
children. It's
Like I pick a little bit of like
right.
insurance. Yeah, insurance.
Right. It tastes like, a down payment.
Right.
I don't know, but it doesn't taste like whiskey.
That's funny. Well, okay, so I think we have a new laundry list of spirits that we're going to be buying soon. So thank you and sorry to the credit card. But yeah, definitely appreciate kind of that list. And I agree with you 100%. There's a couple ones that are new to me, so I'm definitely going to try those. But once again, I can't thank you enough for your time. I know you're a busy person and you have all kind of crazy things happening. So definitely thank you for your time. And if anybody wants to reach out to you, maybe Balvenie is listening to this podcast and they want to reach out to you and say like, let's talk. How would you like people to kind of reach out to you? What's the best platform for you?
The easiest way to connect with us is on Instagram these days.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just at Black Bourbon Society. So shoot us a note in the DMs, and I check those, and we'll get you to where you need to be. But just hit me up on IG, follow us, or click the link on IG, and it'll take you to all the places you want to go. It'll take you to our membership. It'll take you to our private Facebook group where our 25,000 members are constantly talking about bourbon all day long. Like it'll take you to certain links and articles, whatever. Just go to Instagram. It's easy. At Black Bourbon Society.
There you go. Perfect. And last question. Is there anything you'd love to share with us that you'd love to promote that you're working on?
Just stay tuned. We are just coming off of this 5-city tour with Jim Beam, where we were supporting Black-owned bars and restaurants this summer. We're doing, of course, our our BBS Bourbon 30, right? Our 30 days of bourbon.
Mm-hmm.
But now we're really focusing, and we're spending our fall months focusing on our nonprofit, which is Diversity Distilled. And that is really focused around advocating for diversity and inclusion within the brands themselves. We consult with the brands on how they can be more inclusive with their workforce. And we focus around 3 pillars around recruitment, retention, and promotion, with the intention of getting diversity into key positions of leadership within these organizations. Black Bourbon Society wouldn't have had to exist if there was diversity in leadership within the industry. And the only reason why the brands have a hard time reaching consumers of color is because there isn't anyone of color in their boardrooms.
Right.
So ultimately, that is the goal of BBS and Diversity Distilled. Is we want our bourbon to be as diverse as our country is. And Absolutely. We really feel like, that is our charge. That is our true mission. We always are bigger than bourbon because, we're all American, and we all need to be represented, not only in our whiskey, but within the leadership of our whiskey and the makers of our whiskey as well.
Absolutely. Very cool. So we'll have links to all those resources that you mentioned in the show notes over at abarabove.com. And Samara, thank you so much again for your time and all the kind of the knowledge that you have around whiskey. It's super cool. And I'm going to go buy some stuff now.
Well, don't buy. So don't run out and buy stuff, right?
I can't help it. I can't help it. I'm sorry.
I see you've got quite an impressive shelf behind you. And I want to talk to you about all the tequilas back there that I'm looking at.
Mm-hmm.
But, truly go out we're in the middle of a pandemic. Your local bar, your local watering hole has suffered greatly.
Right. Absolutely.
Please visit your local bars, your watering holes, your speakeasies, and have a dram. Talk to the bartenders there. You can get quite a lot of sips in, and discover and uncover what you really love. Just sitting at a bar having a conversation, and then if you love it, then go buy it.
Absolutely, and it's really great from a bartending perspective, because if you find somebody that's passionate about it, you can share your knowledge and your kind of like understanding of the spirit with your consumers and make a really cool regular. Like that was one of my favorite things to do. Like, oh, awesome, you're into Scotch. Try this one. Try this one, and you get to experience it from yourself, but also you get to share it with somebody, and that's the best possible scenario from from my perspective, anyways, as a bartender. Just having those cool moments with potentially new regulars and sharing something that I really, really love. So great advice.
Always remember, bourbon tastes better with friends.
That should be your tagline. That's magic right there. That's like a t-shirt.
Yeah, it tastes better with friends. It really does.
Very cool. Well, thank you again, Samara. And we'll have links to all the resources in the show notes. So thank you again. And hopefully we'll have another chance to have a conversation soon.
Absolutely. Thank you, Chris. Thanks for having me on.
So once again, thank you to Samara Davis for joining us and sharing all the knowledge she has about whiskey and bourbon. It's definitely great to talk to her. And like I said, my shopping cart is going to get really expensive on this next trip to the liquor store. So thanks again. And we'll have links in the show notes to all the resources that we talked about over at abarabove.com. So last thing is, if you love cocktails and if you're listening to this podcast, I'm pretty sure you do, I highly encourage you to check out our bar tools over at abarabove.com. For me, I think these are the best bar tools ever created, but that's because we created them. So that definitely addresses all the frustrations that I had in a high volume bar with substandard bar tools. So hopefully you agree with me that you really enjoy them and you think they're the best as well. So head on over to abarabove.com and check out the bar tools we have.